Welcome back, everyone, to Pencils and Lipstick. This is episode 215 of the podcast. I'm Kat Caldwell, as usual. And today we have a guest. I'm just loving all these guests. I'm having such a good time speaking with them and hearing what they have to say about writing and publishing and books in the world. And it's pretty amazing. I'm having a good time, and I hope that you're having a good time as well. Today, I have Lynne Golodner on the podcast, and we are going to talk about so many things. But I think that this conversation really centers around voice and identity and giving ourselves the encouragement as writers to put our worldview on the page, in our identity on the page. And Lynne is going to talk a lot about that because as she started writing her first book, Woman of Valor, which came out in 2023 in September, she really put on that page and in that story her Jewish heritage, even though it's a character who's not identical to Lynne at all. And I find that really amazing and really encouraging. And what I would love for you guys to take from this conversation that I have with her is to dig deeper into who you are and who you want to be in 2024 and be brave to put that in your story. I think, as I say to Lynne, I think that the stories that really resonate with us are written by authors who are not afraid of the values that they hold and not afraid of putting that on the page. And I know that this has sort of been this theme, right? With the guests that I've had on, and it has not been on purpose. It's just happened that way. And so I think that that is something that we should pay attention to, like this idea of voice and being strong in who you are and what you believe and how you see the world, and allowing that on our page, because in this sort of contentious social media life that we live, a lot of times it can feel safer to be lukewarm and sit on the fence and not show who you are as the author in your stories. And I think that's a mistake. But you let me know what you think. You can argue with me about this on Instagram at catcaldwell.author or Pencils and Lipstick, all spelled out. You can send me a TikTok at Pencils Lipstick or Cat Caldwell Author. You can even find me on Twitter, Pencils Lipstick, but yeah, I'm rarely there. And Thread has never worked for me. I don't know what's going on over there. I can't post, I can't ever. I've never been able to do it. If it claims that I've posted, I mean, I don't know. It tells me that it hasn't gone through. But you can also join my writing newsletter or my readers newsletter. You can send me a message at catcaldwell.com. Let me know what you think about my thoughts on being brave and putting your ideas out there through your story. If you disagree with me, I'd love to hear from you. So we are going to talk to Lynne. I think that you're really going to enjoy this interview. Her last name is Golodner, Golodner. So just in case you're running or driving or whatever, lynnegolodner.com. Of course, the links are in the show notes. You can find everything about her on her website. I'll also have links to the book as well. And since Lynne is being asked to speak, I encourage you to go out and see if she's going to speak near you, especially if you're in the Midwest. She's in Michigan. See if she's going to speak near you. And wouldn't that be fun to hear an author speak? That used to happen before COVID, right? I used to go out and listen to authors speak. So okay, without further ado, before we get into the podcast, into the interview, of course, if you guys can like and review the podcast, that would be great. Please share it with people who you think are going to love it or who are writers as well. And definitely check out Lynne's podcast. It's called Make Meaning Podcast. Check that out as well, right after this conversation with Lynne. So before we get into like my very first question, would you tell people a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Lynne Golodner. I've always been a writer since I was a little girl, and I am the author of 9 books, thousands of articles and essays in magazines, newspapers, and literary journals. I'm also a writing coach. I teach a lot of writing classes. I am a marketing expert and I am a podcast host. My podcast is the Make Meaning podcast.
So my first question for you, because there's like so many things that you do. Um, what we have quite a few different coaches on here because we talk a lot about indie writing, indie publishing, because that's my area. And then, of course, a lot of people are traditionally published. And there's like, I've had a couple different book coaches on here, and I myself am certified, but you call yourself a writing coach, which is a little bit different. So, or is it different? I don't know. Would you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes, so I do both writing coaching and author coaching. There
Okay.
might be book coaching within that, but it's not like book coaching is specifically to get a book done or
Mm-hmm.
plan out a book.
Okay.
I start way before that because so many writers who are part of my programs are just looking for the confidence to believe in themselves as writers.
Mm.
And there's such rhetoric out there for so much of our lives that says writing is a nice little hobby, but you can't make any money at it, and why
Yes.
should you pursue it? So we
Yes.
all sort of relegate it to the shadows for so many years until we get to a point where we say, no, I really, really want to write.
Right.
And yet those voices are in our heads. And so I do a lot of unlearning, I guess I would say, and help people find the confidence to believe in themselves, to believe that they can write and
Yeah.
it's a worthwhile pursuit, and that they could even build an author career at it.
Okay.
So there's a lot of confidence building in the coaching that I do, working on the craft of writing. So that could be a book, or it could be a series of poems, or it could be an essay, or a short story. And then I work with authors all the way through like how to get published. So
Right.
that could be submitting poems to literary journals, or it could
Okay.
be putting a manuscript together, which would be the book coaching. And then it would be how do you want to publish? So like you said
Oh,
earlier, it could be indie publishing, or it could be querying and finding an agent and going the traditional route.
right.
But it's really about believing in themselves enough to envision a career that they're going
Yeah.
to be happy with, and that they might be able to build a volume of work over time. And
Yeah.
so I think that's what's special about the coaching that I do.
Yeah. It's very well rounded. It's not just focusing on part of writing because I think we do sometimes forget about those literary journals. They're still out there. And like if you write short stories or poetry, there are avenues to get published, right?
Yeah. And I write a lot of creative nonfiction essays, even though I'm
Okay.
writing novels, I do that simultaneously. And it just sort of builds up, my exposure, my name, my
Right.
credibility. And you never know, I might do a collection of essays at some point, and
Yeah.
then I can say they were all published before. So there's a lot. I mean, frankly, writing creative nonfiction essays is a marketing path for authors too, because
Hmm.
then people are like, wow, this was interesting. Let me check out what she's written, and then they look for your books and things like that. So part of the coaching that I do, it's really the whole thing from the beginning all the way through. And so even if they're working on a book and then they're working on publishing it, there's all the marketing, there's all the being out in the world, and how do you have a social media presence and whatever. So that is part of it too. It's really like
Right.
the whole journey of the author, and really trying to bring their dreams into reality. So it's a lot of fun.
Yes. Yes. I really like that. I've had a couple guests on in 2024 that we were talking about this before of just like that has sort of been this theme of writing who like all parts of your creativity, right? So like and not being afraid because I think that there's or like squashing it. Maybe it's not being afraid, but like squashing it because it's like, oh, I found success in this genre, or I am going to do it like this because that's what they say I should do because romantic thrillers are making a comeback or whatever. And it's it's possible, like you said, to find avenues to voice that creativity and just have all of your different writing genres and ways out there. And I think it's really great. And I think that we should be reminded not to like squash that, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, I really think that however you want to publish is valid, and whatever you want to shoot for, you should go for it. Even if
Yeah.
it's not a traditional, path or description, you don't fit into a specific category, it might be harder to market you, but you can do it. And if you believe in it, why not go for it? So this self-belief is at the root of a successful publishing career. And I think that you have to start with that or you're not going to go anywhere no matter how you publish. You have to believe in
That's
yourself.
true. That's true. I think this believing in yourself, and I wonder if it had, I was talking to another author friend of mine, and she was like, there are, she was talking about this author. She was like, she had worked really hard. She wrote this book, and what struck her was like she was just so proud of her book. And she was like,
Yeah.
I want to be like that. Like I want to not, feel every criticism or every review that's not, like getting into your head. Like it's a lot about confidence, isn't it? It's like bringing that forward. And do you help people with that in as part of this coaching as well?
Absolutely. I mean, so much of, our lack of self-belief comes
Mm-hmm.
from depending on outside sources to give
Okay.
us validation. And we all look for that, our whole lives. We want to know that our parents approve of us, our teachers or whatever. Um, and that's a story we're told from a very young age. But the truth is that so many other people's opinions of you often have nothing to do with you. They're often about
Mm,
that person. And so it's important to train yourself to be able to tune out the voices, both the good and the bad. So people can say they love your book and they can say they hate it, but does it have to do with you? Really? So
yeah.
I love the validation. I love when people say they love my books,
Yes,
but
of course we can't help but like that. I mean, yeah, it's human, right?
for sure, for sure. But like if your self, I guess, identity rides on
Mm,
external validation, you're going to be riding a roller coaster.
yeah.
My book that came out in September of 2023, Woman of Valor, I've had one negative review, knock on wood. I'm hoping that there aren't any more. But the review was, oh, there's too much food in this book. That was the negative review. And I was like, I mean, kind of laughed at it, and I'm like, I can live with that. That's cool.
Yeah,
But like,
that's
why did you waste your time giving me that review? Like, but yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that has nothing to do with me at all,
yeah. Well, let's talk about your book. What brought you to write Woman of Valor?
Well, Woman of Valor is my ninth book, but my first novel.
Okay,
And I actually wrote another novel first that is in a drawer that will probably always live there. It's
we
like
all have
not
one of
worth
those.
seeing the light of day, yes. But Woman of Valor, I started writing in 2011 and I stalled after about 60 pages. And
Okay.
I came back to it in 2021. And I think I've really been trying to write fiction for about 25 years. And I just don't think my writing skills were mature enough to get there. Like I had books of poetry and books of nonfiction that were pretty easy for me because I had a journalism career and
Okay.
then a marketing career. And that's all, they're short, they're contained, they're
Mm,
researched and interviews. And so I found those much easier, but I needed to mature in my patience and in my voice to write fiction. And so, Woman of Valor, when I went back to it in 2021, it was sort of like a midlife crisis. Like, am I really a writer? Am I going to do this thing or is it always going to be in the
that's
shadows of
so
what I
funny
do?
that you thought that you had 8 books. You're like, we still,
I know, but they were always on the side of things, and
yeah,
like
yeah.
I never made money at it. I never even thought about making money at it. So I was like, nope, writing's going to be front and center. Like I still am going to
Okay,
do other things, but
okay,
I'm going to teach writing. I'm going to have marketing clients, but my writing is going to start each day, and I'm going to focus on creating a volume of work and put out novels like year after
yeah,
year. And so I liked the bones of the story, but I thought it needed to be totally redone. And
okay.
I set about writing it, and it's an interesting story. It's about a young woman who chooses to become Orthodox in Judaism,
Mm,
and she lives in Chicago, and she loves her life. But then one of her kids is abused at school, and she's of course outraged. And so is her husband, but he's always been Orthodox, and he's like, "Well, I don't want to cast shadows on the community. Let's
right.
handle this subtly." And she's like, "Are you kidding me? Call in the cops, And right around that time, her ex-boyfriend, who dumped her, which then led her to become Orthodox in the first place, finds her on Facebook and is like, "I made a huge mistake, and I never should have broken up with
Ooh,
you." And so she's like, what do I do?" And so lots of suspense,
yeah.
romance, all
And big
kinds of things in there,
questions.
and but
Like like
really
really
big
big
questions.
questions
Yeah,
about your identity, your worlds, when to
yeah,
leave.
yeah. This is really a book for sure. And can you stay and how? it's really about carving out an identity that you can live, that you love to live.
Mm, right.
And I think that's a really good topic for all of us because so often we just sort of fall into our identities. We don't necessarily choose it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so it's a fun story. People tell me it's a quick read. People have said it's literary, which made me happy,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I was really excited about it, and I had my earlier books were all published by publishers, and I chose to start a press to publish Women of Valor because I just didn't want to compromise either the story or, really any of it. And I also didn't want to wait years
Mm-hmm.
for somebody else to decide to take it on. And I'm a good marketer. So I felt like, I want to do this myself. And I also, it's a very Jewish book. Lots of non-Jewish readers have loved it, which made me really feel great. Um, it's important to me to write novels that have compelling Jewish characters. My
Right.
next book is not religious in the nature of the story, but Jewish identity is still in there.
Okay.
And I didn't want a publisher to be like, it's too Jewish or, like, you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Right. Like, does
um,
it need to be part of the story? Like, yes, it's part
right.
of
So I'm
that
like,
person's
yeah, it
identity.
does.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad
Yes,
that I
yes,
mean
yeah,
you published it in a really contentious time, right? Unfortunately.
yes.
In like September it came out and it but you've had good reception to it and you haven't had any bad
No,
reception. Good.
yeah, it was 10 days before Hamas attacked Israel.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knew like
Yeah. Yeah.
what this world would produce, but, um, and all this anti-Semitism. And I find that it's even more important now. And so I give so many talks about what is a Jewish book and, why should we write Jewish stories? And I think it's important to show positive Jewish stories, proud, strong Jewish people in my books. And now I feel like it's even more important. So,
Right.
I made a conscious decision not to show a horrible Orthodox community. We've
Hmm.
seen those books, like, um, something happens that's bad. Yeah, that happens in a lot of communities, but it's a really, she loves being Orthodox, and I wanted that to be part of it. And I'm just invigorated to be out there and talk about issues of identity, issues of being strong in your Jewish identity, and I don't think that if anything, it's energized what I'm doing. I feel
Yeah,
like it's a mission now.
I think that's really lovely and it's interesting how world events and your own passions can actually fire up your passions, right? And I think it's we talk about like being true to like your worldview. I was listening to another author talking about how they started writing in the 80s and 90s, and I was almost like, oh, you're so lucky because writing their worldview was not impeded by this social media and the constant barrage of news or like what's going on. It was just like, this is what I'm writing. And so I really love talking to authors now. It just seems to be happening right now. Get you guys as guests of like, it's so important to, like you said, even if your next book is not about being Orthodox Jewish, that's, I have so many friends that that's part of their life. You walk into their house and it's part of their identity, just like my husband's identity is, Spanish Catholic. Like you will see parts of that through our house. And that's brings an essence to a book and a story that's really real, right? It's really human.
That's so true. My next book, which is done and it should be out in later 2024, um, like I said, it's not Orthodox at all, but there are issues of anti-Semitism. It takes place
Mm,
partially in Scotland, partially in Michigan, and so there's some historical elements. It's contemporary, but there are some historical figures that, sort of like their descendants are current day, lords and ladies and whatever. And anti-Semitism sort of ran through the aristocracy
right,
for a long time, and so I wrote this book early in 2023. Actually got the idea for it in 2022. And so it'll come out at a time when anti-Semitism is like at its height.
right.
And I think a traditional publisher would not have touched it, but I
Mm,
still think it's a great story. And of course, I think it's relevant.
yeah,
So
yeah.
um, I'm going forward with it. There's
Yeah.
no reason. So
Yeah, absolutely. I
yeah,
think
I
it's
think
important to understand
yeah,
that there are lots of people out there, just as we talked in the past few years in the publishing industry of the gatekeepers and keeping marginalized voices out and not showing different aspects, especially of American culture and different racial groups or whatever other identity groups. Like, I think just like you said, it's more important than ever to have this that to realize and to remind people that everyone's really different and it's great and we should really embrace it and learn, right? And be
yeah,
intrigued by it
yeah,
and to understand history. Like,
yeah.
and we
Well, it's
might not know
interesting,
history, you know?
yeah, it often repeats itself, so it's great to keep revisiting, but I was recently on a webinar with Hadassah Magazine, and there were some famous Jewish authors who were talking about, what makes a book Jewish and the nature of writing about Jewish topics. And they said, which is really true, books are opportunities to really sit with things that happen and process
Mm,
because books take time. One thing to write an op-ed or a quick little social post, that's a knee-jerk reaction.
right,
But in a few years, we'll see books out about events from today because it takes us time to really sit
right.
with what happens, process it, make meaning and understanding from it.
Mm,
And so I think that that's one of the benefits of writing books because it takes you on a journey. It
yeah,
it makes you think, and um, and we really take our time with it, and I think
yeah,
that's great. So,
yeah.
you know, yeah, I think that books can really change the way we think
Right.
about things.
Right. Like you said, because of the time that the author puts into it, that really always resonates with the reader, right? Like the more time that the author has put into it, the more feel that and understand that. And you might like go look it up in a history book and be like, oh my gosh, that's true. Like, and you can just, your whole idea of something can change because of one book, a fiction book. Like, that's pretty cool. That's
Right,
pretty
right.
amazing.
That's so true.
So what was
Yeah,
your
yeah, it's awesome.
writing like it's 2021's the middle of the pandemic and you decided that you're going to endeavor on like fiction writing. Yay. The world's going insane and you're like,
Yeah,
I'm going to do
woohoo!
this.
So about 5 years ago ish, that's when I was having this sort of existential conversation about like, am I really a writer? Because I do it on the side and I focus most of my hours on income earning things. And so
Yes.
even though you're right, I have a body of work, they were really like just labors of love, that whole
Hmm.
martyr perspective. And I said, I love writing and
Yeah.
why am I not focusing on it? Why have I let all these decades go by? So I really started shifting my schedule. I first started by writing at like 5 a.m. for an hour, just creative writing, and then I would start my workday, and then it became 2 hours, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to get up at 5 a.m. So
Yeah.
could I move things around, like so that writing can be my mornings and then other ways of earning income in the afternoon. So it took some time and some planning. And I started with creative nonfiction essays
Okay.
and I built up a strategy of writing every single day, 5 days a week for 3 or 4 hours in the morning, and then doing my work in the afternoon. And I said, okay, this is great, and I'm having all this success writing essays and getting them published, but I've always wanted to write a novel. And
Mm.
so even though I have other books out, I just think I can do it. And that's when I started sitting down and thinking about how to work on a book. This book obviously was a little rough because it started with old pages and I was just sort of cutting my teeth on it. And so then I, hired a developmental editor, and then I revised and revised and revised and sent it back to her. And and I had some readers, and it took me. I mean, it didn't take me that long to be honest. It took me longer just to sort of do the revising, and
Right.
then I was really pleased with it. So I
Mm.
thought for a hot minute about shopping it around, but ultimately, I really wanted to do it my way. And then, somebody told me that the best way to build an author career is to write book after book after book. And while you're marketing one book, to be working on the next one so
Right.
that you don't have all your eggs in one basket, all your hopes pinned to this one book. So when I was in the process of like the cover design and the marketing strategy and all the things for Women of Valor and planning the launch and whatever, I started writing the next book. And so now that that's done, like, this, 2024, I'm working on book three. And
Right.
so as I work on getting book two out. So,
But this is
um,
not a series, or is it a
nope,
series?
no,
Okay.
no,
They're
no,
all
no,
standalone.
they're all standalone. I thought about Woman of Valor being the first in a series of three. So I do have ideas for the other two books, but I just wanted to write something else.
Yeah.
So we'll see if something else comes out from.
You sound like me. I'm like, but I don't want to. So, like, but I have other priorities. Like,
Yeah.
you must be pretty high on the individualist of the Clifton strengths. We're always like, but I'm going to do it my way.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
So what was it like then to go that setting up your own press? I mean, what I would consider the indie route, right? Like setting up your own business around the book. And you have a marketing history, so you know what you're doing, which is one step above many of us authors who are like, oh my gosh, I have to market my book. Oh my
Yep.
gosh.
Yes.
So what was that like in just setting that up? Was that pretty much once the decision was made, you just went forward in it?
Yeah, I kind of just move fast. And so once I decided that, I decided to create an imprint, with the logo, branding, all that stuff. Um, and yeah, I do have, it's called Scotia Road Books, and I do have it open as a hybrid press for women over 40 with strong voices. And so if there are women authors who want to go that route, we'll do it. But it's not like
Mm-hmm.
I want to make this my next business. I just wanted a more professional presentation
Right.
for for my books, and then whoever else wants to go that route. And yeah, it was fairly easy to do, and I'm really proud of it, and I love the way the book looks. It's gorgeous, and I did everything through Ingram Spark except for Amazon. Amazon is on Amazon.
Yeah.
Everything else is Ingram Spark, and the quality is amazing. So,
Yeah, it's gotten
fun.
great.
Yeah.
I don't think you can tell the difference, honestly. The only thing I would say like is like the back of the book. Like some indie authors should really study back book, the back of the book. How do you say that? The back, like the professional, like you can sometimes tell, if it doesn't have all
Right.
the little things on there.
Yep. Yep.
But that's easy. That's easy to fix, right? You just
So
sort of
easy.
go like, oh, okay, I'm gonna put my imprint and yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So,
then you do you incorporate like when you sound very busy. Okay, we haven't even gotten to your podcast yet. So you're like writing, you're coaching writers in their writing. Then your marketing wise, is that working directly with the writers or is that like a whole different thing?
so when I made this shift 5-ish years ago, I decided to shift everything so that all I'm doing is focusing on like in the writing world. So like
Oh,
my
okay.
marketing company, I've had different niches over the years of clients that I've worked with. And when I made this shift, I decided I would only take on clients who are authors or people in publishing. And so change that around. And I've always taught writing because I have an MFA, and so it has allowed me to teach at the college level, and so I
Right.
teach a lot of writing classes. But I kept two clients from my old roster of clients when I shrank the business, just for bread and butter income, and they both have a lot of writing to them. So, in
Hmm.
fact, one of those clients, it is a writing focused endeavor,
That's cool.
but yeah, and so I do that, but I really don't take on a lot of marketing clients. I will work with authors to help them learn to market. I don't want to
That's
do the
probably
marketing for
best.
them. Yeah, 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 yeah. Like I think it's important to empower writers to be able to do it
Hmm.
themselves. So I'll do that, and I offer like a mastermind so they can learn the marketing skills. But I also shifted the podcast. So it
Okay.
started in 2018, and it was really just about how people find meaning and purpose in work and in life. And when I made this shift, I made it to exclusively focus on authors and people in publishing.
That's
So
wonderful.
it's great. Yeah, I get a lot of free books, and I get to hear all the writer journeys. So that's awesome.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's called the Make Meaning podcast. So you've had that since 2018.
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
you've been doing it longer than me.
Aw.
I'm finding all these new podcasts now too. So
Yeah.
you interview exclusively authors and people in the publishing field.
Yep. Uh-huh.
So you are just steeped in the writing world like me.
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, is there a world outside of this? I don't know.
Well, it's not for me. I love being in the writing world, so it's perfect and everything aligns. And I feel like that's really important when you want to make a change. You just have to get serious about it and surround yourself with everything that's going to help you succeed with it.
Yeah.
So, I already have this platform. Why not focus it on giving exposure to authors,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So you have an MFA. I've interviewed a couple of people, a couple of different people who have gotten their MFAs, and they've all reacted a little bit differently and sort of branched out and done very different, diverse businesses and writing endeavors because of it. What was your experience in getting the MFA? Because you didn't leave with your book, I assume, or did you?
Well, so I did my MFA in the 90s.
Okay.
So, and I was a journalist at the time. So the first 15 years of my career, I was a journalist. I was
So
a
you
New
knew
York.
how to write. You knew
Yeah, yeah,
you're like, yeah, I can do this. It's
that I
easy.
can do. So I lived in New York and I lived in Washington,
Oh, fun.
D.C., and that was when I did my MFA. And so I was at it working at a newspaper, plus I was doing this at night. And I really did it because I always wanted a graduate degree, but I wanted to be able to teach at the university level. And
Okay.
an MFA allows you to do that. And so I did my MFA in poetry, even though I was
Oh,
working as a
cool.
journalist. And my master's thesis was a manuscript of poems.
All right.
And it was accepted by a publisher before graduation. So I arrived at graduation with a box of books, which was really
Oh,
cool.
wow. That's very cool.
Yeah, that was super cool. So the MFA just allowed me to be able to teach at the college level. And when I went freelance in journalism in the very late 90s, I could supplement my income as a freelancer with teaching university writing classes.
And do you teach
So
poetry exclusive or do you teach different things?
I've taught everything. I've taught literature, I've taught fiction and poetry, I've taught journalism, I've taught freshman composition and
Yeah.
um, argumentative writing. I've taught them all. So yeah, it's great. And I actually love teaching writing. I love teaching adults writing. And so a lot of my classes now, either I offer through my website or I teach through writingworkshops.com. And
Okay.
so, and I've taught at University of Detroit Mercy for a very long time, but just on and off because it's not always worth the time if it's like 3 days a week or something.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of depends on what it is. So poetry, is that something that you developed a passion for as an adult or did you write it as a kid as well?
Well, I think I probably wrote very bad poetry as a kid, but
Well, yeah. I mean, we're
you know,
we're children. You can't judge us.
roses are red, violets are blue. So, I went to University of Michigan undergrad, and I remember taking poetry classes and thinking I must be really stupid because I don't get what this professor is saying this poem is about. Like I
Okay.
don't see it.
Yeah.
I felt like I really didn't understand poetry. So it's funny that I went to grad school for it because then I moved from college to New York City and was part of a writer's workshop in Greenwich Village every week. And I was the youngest person there, and there were people writing poems. And I was like, oh, I get this. Oh, now I understand. Like it was just
Okay.
maybe it was a bad professor, maybe I don't know.
Brain
But
development.
like seriously. So I really got excited about contemporary poetry
Yeah.
and started writing it in that workshop. So when I applied to grad school, I was like, well, I already have a degree in journalism. So why don't I do the poetry and really immerse in it? And it was amazing. It was just so
Yeah.
much fun. But I do think that it's more contemporary poetry that I love. Like older poetry, I don't love as much. And so I like just seeing all the different forms and styles and attempts at creating new forms.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's why I did poetry. But I think that I know that my poetry and my nonfiction really complement each other.
Okay.
Because I've been told that a lot of my poems feel very like there's lots of details that I must have researched or reported. And my nonfiction is very lyrical and creative and stuff. And so I think that's kind of cool. I love
Yeah.
merging it
That is very cool. I just spoke to a woman a few weeks ago. She's like a romance thriller and then decided to publish poetry and it
all.
really had a lot to do with just like her the moment of life that she was in and I've been thinking about this and how much we can allow ourselves to have that compliment and to a lot of times see what other parts of writing, like if you're lyrical in your nonfiction, perhaps try poetry. If I don't
Yeah.
think we're encouraged to do poetry enough in this day and age,
No,
you know.
no. And so many people in my writing classes will be like, because I accept all genres, and so they'll be like, "Oh, I don't really, I don't get poetry, so I hope my feedback is helpful." And I'm like, "No, I don't think we're allowed to say that. Like, we all have to trust ourselves that we can glean some meaning from a poem, and it doesn't have to be like the right way or something. It's just, you know, I think people are afraid of it, to be honest, you
Yeah,
know?
I think so too. It
Yeah,
seems so literary and so like
yeah,
high above us. We're just like,
yeah,
but it's funny because you can listen to a song and you can understand the story behind a song
sure.
lyrics, and you think, well, isn't that just poetry?
Yeah,
Maybe, you
100%.
know,
Yeah,
like
totally.
whether you think it's good or bad, like it's really up to you.
All subjective,
Also,
you might not, and vice versa, for
exactly,
sure.
exactly. So do you on your when you're doing the online writing classes, do you do poetry as well, or is it just it's all different kinds of genres that you're teaching?
So, my signature course, I have two signature courses that people love. One is called Finding Your Voice, and that's any genre. And it's really about finding your voice. So it does not matter
Mm.
what you're writing. The other one is Demystifying Show, Don't Tell. So that advice that you always
Ooh,
get, like people are like, okay, but how? And so I'm like, let me teach a course on it. So
yeah.
I think those are probably the best courses. And then I do teach one specific poetry course. It's perfecting line breaks in poetry because it bothers me when people just have random line breaks. And I'm like, let me teach you how to do it. So um, that's the only one that's for poets only.
Okay.
It's just fun because I like people to understand like why do we break the lines?
Yeah.
What's the structure about? And so
Like there are some rules, right? Or some
yeah, I
to
feel like you have to know the rules so
to
that you
break
can
the
break.
rules. Yes.
Yeah.
So finding your voice, like in the beginning of the of our conversation, that was a um you hit on that as well. So what is it about like finding your voice? I think that is a term that we use a lot in writing, right? Because we're writing through and we call it voice.
Uh-huh.
But what does that mean really to you, especially if you like specifically work with, women over 40 with strong voice? Like what does this embody to you?
Well, I'll just tell you, I do have students who are younger, and I do have male students too, but the press is only for women
And the
over 40.
press is on, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry.
So that's okay. So so finding your voice has a lot to do with figuring out who you are and who you want to be. So
Okay.
identity, like we talked about earlier, really
Mm-hmm.
factors into that, and being conscious of it. So a lot of times we just sort of follow the path we were set on by parents or teachers or a degree we got or something. And we never really think about, is this who I want to be? Like, why do I believe what I do? Why do I vote the way I do? Why do I live here? Like all these questions. I think it's really worthwhile to visit them at some point
Mm.
and decide if it all works for you. And so finding your writing voice is much like that.
Okay.
And a lot of what we do in the course, and there are two parts to the course, are look at where our notions of self originated from, and to pick apart whether it's our notion or one that was given to us,
Mm.
and really start to look back at like our origin stories and all of the influences that have led us to be who we are today, and then make a conscious decision about what from that we want to keep and what we want to discard because it isn't us, it's somebody else,
Yeah.
and consciously create this identity through which your voice is going to come. And so
Yeah.
a lot of people say the class is a little like therapy. I am not a therapist, but a lot of the questions make you like have these aha moments like, oh my gosh,
Right.
I never realized that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. It's cool.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been trying to figure out for the last few weeks, months, maybe it all blurs. Like what makes a certain book like resonate with you and stick with you versus and everyone has a different idea. But I wonder what you think of this. I'm starting to think it might be because the author knows who they are and
Yeah.
what part of their worldview they're willing to not compromise on in that book. And just like you were talking about with like, no, I'm not going to compromise my Jewish heritage and that I want the reader to know that this is a Jewish character, even if they're not Orthodox Jewish or whatever. And like that is a strong pillar of the book. I wonder if that's what causes those stories to stick with us and be timeless, right? Like,
I love that. I think you hit the nail on the head. And that's, a brilliant way to look at it. And I think a writer who has, I mean, you're basically saying self-knowledge, identity, confidence. The writer has all of that and says, I'm not going to compromise it. And I agree
Right.
with you 100%.
Yeah. And I think it's then makes it really important to have these groups of writers who like even if they don't agree all the time with each other, which whoever does, but
Yeah.
whatever, if we're willing to encourage each other to find the voice
Yeah.
and be uncompromisingly who they are and how they see the world. And what's
Sure.
interesting is like you can always mature, right? Like wouldn't it be lovely to have like your legacy of books and be like, look how much I've matured throughout my life.
I love that. Yes, for sure. I mean, I do think like that when I was building my author brand before Women of Valor came out, I was like, okay, I've branded so many clients. I've done helped them with their marketing, and I'm like, well, what is my author brand? And
Mm,
I was really pleased to see that even through my poetry and my nonfiction, there's a theme of Jewish identity. So I
that's
was like,
wonderful.
oh, cool. Even though I'm straddling genres, I'm consistent in the topics, in the sensibility, and who I am. So that makes it a lot easier to create an author brand. So I don't have to
Right.
discount older books. I can say it's all part of the journey. And
Oh,
I think that that's really important to just know who you are so that that's what you bring to the page.
that's really interesting. I like that because I think that must come from like your years of working with people. But that's interesting because as people want to branch out, if they look at what is really like, I guess their strongest worldview or their strongest value, right? And that's what you saw. So like if an author is listening and trying to think like how would they branch out, maybe instead of looking at the individual books, like seeing who they are and what theme has crossed over all the time.
Yeah, so when I was in grad school, I was reading Jewish feminist writers. I read a lot of Native American writers because I wanted to read writers who were strong in their identity
Hmm.
and that see how that played out on the page. I read a lot of writers from Michigan because that's where I'm from, and I just wanted to see how those identities showed up in the writing. And it was so helpful to guide me in creating my sense of self because I mean, yes, I'm from Michigan, I'm Jewish, I'm feminist, I'm all these things, but I've gone tons of places. I've had a lot of different experiences. And um, so as I've evolved, what has stayed the same? What has been grounded? What's at the root?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's cool to see that there's something there.
That is really cool because as you talk, it makes me realize like we have these titles, right? But they can mean really different things for each person because of the way that they combine together, right?
For sure. Yes.
Like I'm
Yeah.
from Wisconsin, you're from Michigan. There are some very big differences between those two states,
Yes, there are. Yes, there
even though
are.
we're from the north, like,
Yes.
hey, the
Yep.
time zone is just completely messed up.
I know. Everybody thinks Michigan is central. We are not. But yes. Yep.
And that little hat you have on top of Wisconsin, like, why is that? No, anyway.
That's so funny. I've never heard it called a hat. That's really cute.
And that little, and then there's the Minnesotans, and we don't know what to do with them. So,
I have a son who's in college in Minnesota and he wants to stay in the Twin Cities.
you're like,
So, yeah, we were at a choir concert that he was in recently and there were a lot of Nordic sweaters. I was just like, oh, it's a whole different culture. You don't see those in Michigan.
completely different. Like,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
anyone's too young to have watched Fargo, like that area,
yeah,
Michigan, like Minnesota and North Dakota, like people walk around in ski masks because it's that cold. Like, it's so like even that, our identities are really different. Like our experiences have shaped us into very different people, right? Just
yeah,
like, and I'm sure my friend who's Jewish from Milwaukee and you would probably have different experiences growing up and maybe similarities as well, but
yeah.
that's what's so much fun.
It is. It's really cool. Yeah,
So I just love how you're encouraging writers to ask themselves those questions because I think especially as we hit a certain age in life, we start revisiting all of those. What whoever we were in our 20s and 30s is probably not who we are in our 40s and 50s, and like always having to revisit that. And it used to be like the job of the writer, right? And we kind of I feel like we kind of got away from that,
yeah,
and I love that you are challenging the writers that you work with to come back. Like
yeah.
like find your voice. Maybe it's different, maybe it's the same, but why? And dig a little bit deeper and get those deep stories then that like stick to us.
It's often who you were long, long ago, and you abandoned that person, that little kid,
Mm,
because you thought, well, I can't be a writer. So, you sort of buried it, and it's about excavating. And
yeah.
I'm not the career or the spouse or the whatever. I'm who was that person who wrote because it was fun and because you
Yeah.
were just compelled to, and being that person again. And it's
Yeah.
really great. It really is.
Yes. And the greatest thing about writing is it's okay if yeah, it doesn't matter what age you are, if you left it behind years ago, like you can always come back to it, right? You can
Oh,
always you always have those stories in your head and
when
they're
you're 90, you can do it at any time. I love it.
yes, it's wonderful. So your first novel was Woman of Valor, and it came out in September of 2023. Do you have a title for this next one coming up?
I do. It is Cave of Secrets.
Ooh,
Yes, and it will be out in the last quarter of 2024.
okay. So where can people find you and find your books and possibly work with you and find your podcast?
I love all of those questions. So, lynnegolodner.com is my website. My books are available anywhere you buy books. So, the nonfiction, the poetry, but also Women of Valor, anywhere you want to go to buy it. Um, I'm speaking all over the place. And so, if I come to your city, I'd love to meet you. And yeah, the podcast, Make Meaning Podcast, is on all podcast platforms. There's also a makemeaning.org website, and that's where you would submit a request form to be a guest
Mm,
on the podcast. That is, everybody has to go through that. You fill out the form, you submit your photo, bio, etc. And just so you know, we are booking now for the end of 2024. I'm going to take a little hiatus from August until beginning of November, and then we'll have new episodes. But we have lots of authors in the queue,
very
so
cool.
listen in.
Very
It'll be
cool.
great. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we will have those links in the show notes below. I encourage you guys to go find Woman of Valor. I don't know why I can't. Woman of Valor. Oh my goodness.
Woohoo!
And Lynne Golodner and check out and see if she is speaking near you and go out. It's, forget forget that we got holed up for years. Go out and meet new people and meet some authors and you'll have a great time. Thank you so much, Lynn, for coming on Pencils and Lipstick.
Thanks for having me, Kat. It's been a lot of fun.